Everybody, this is Jomar Statkun. He is currently in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and on the border, basically between Williamsburg, Bushwick, and Bed-Stuy, right in the middle where they all touch, kind of. And
the epicenter of the virus, basically.
Yeah. And he's living in a big warehouse with his family and a couple of roommates, and it's a pretty idyllic place in New York that kind of doesn't exist anymore, actually. There are very, very few places like this that were settled like more than 20 years ago by artists who kind of took over the space and divided giant warehouses up with skylights and everything into like live work situations. And theirs is very, very special, and even has an outdoor area. So if you're going to be in New York, it's a good place to be. But we're talking to Jomar from the center of it all. And Jomar is a really social person, and is a founding member of the organization This Red Door, which is a roving art experiential kind of residency kind of place thing that goes from place to place. And Jomar is an artist and has done shows all over in New York and all over Europe and China, and has taught at Columbia University and at Pratt, and currently just taught the second half of the classes I taught the first half of at Pratt, and just finished this past week with that semester there at Pratt. And also has a long career as someone working in galleries and museums, and most notably, I guess, worked for Larry Gagosian at Gagosian Gallery in New York. For those of you that know, it's a very blue chip, high powered mega gallery.
That was painful, not enjoyable. So it's not.
Yeah.
It's not a happy time, but.
And also, let's see here, what else? Jomar, also, I've known Jomar for about 14 years maybe, and have done lots of projects together, lots of collaborations. Yeah, that's a roving introduction. But ladies and gentlemen, my friend, Jomar Statkun.
Thank you, Grayson. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Zoom. It's awesome here. I just thought, let's see, the best way to do this. I'll just give a quick intro to what I thought I'd show you guys and talk about. Just I've been giving a few talks lately about my work through Zoom, and I thought maybe every time I'm doing it, especially now, it's like the question of like, why are we doing this, and as artists in these times, and the questions all around that. So I thought I'd kind of just show some brief things of work I've done earlier, and then kind of speed it up to some work that I feel like is more relevant to maybe the questions we're wondering now about art and what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what could be the future or anything like that. But I want to make this really casual. So if anyone has any questions, anything, stop me, ask anything at all about art or life or anything like that. So we can make it super casual. Let's see, I'm going to share my screen.
Great. Let me know if there's a problem.
I think you need to make me a co-host.
Boom. Done.
Okay, can everyone kind of see that? A bunch of folders. Awesome. All right, I'm just gonna go through some of this early work. I don't know how many people are doing printmaking who are here or with Grayson there, but some of the work ties into printmaking and the idea of collaborative works. Just to give you an idea of some of the things, some drawings. These are just some drawings from a while ago. Just to show you some ways I've been working. I tend to get pretty obsessive about drawing, and these are just pencil on paper, like 8 by 10. And a lot of the works tend to be fairly political and referencing um, other things in the news or history.
And whose signature is that?
This is James Ensor, kind of a hero of mine in my early painting days. This is on panel, just mixed media. Just to give you an idea, I'll kind of move through some of this quickly and talk about it some. This is a photogravure print I did about the American-Filipino War.
Can you explain briefly what photogravure is?
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of etching type process where you're coating a plate or getting a pre-coated plate. And it's a many-layered process where you're burning the plate through a photo emulsion. And you're building up these tones that become very photographic. And the hardest part of this is inking it and wiping it in the end. But it's a lot of fun if you're kind of obsessive. Just moving on, these were some things I was doing with laser cutting. And I was using a veneer, a thin wood veneer, and cutting into the wood veneer and then creating light boxes. Another similar thing using laser cutting, where I was cutting into mat board. And I was able to use a machine for a while, so I was able to test the different strengths of the laser as well as the timing, and I could kind of burn parts of the material I was cutting. This is an installation view just of some of the, some of these pieces, drawings, and light boxes. Another installation where I was making molding, sculptural molding, and I was doing a similar thing where I was laser cutting into wood veneer and putting it over hollow boxes that made up the larger molding, and then putting light boxes inside those. Another piece where I was laser cutting into plexiglass and then inking it and wiping it and printing it in that way. And some of these were really interesting because I did a lot of them where they were just embossed, where I wouldn't ink them at all, but I would run them through the press. And so in kind of raking light, you would be able to start seeing the images. This again is using a wood veneer and laser etching into it and drawing on top of it. This is another fun project that I don't know if anyone is familiar much with the Chapman brothers, who these two brother artists that did a lot of crazy and wild installations, drawings, prints. and they've been working for a long time in this way. And they got a hold of a whole suite of Goya etchings, and they took those etchings and they had them in their studio for a long time. They bought the whole set, and one day they thought it would be a cool idea to start drawing on top of them. Um, Kind of crazy. So they started drawing all their kind of famous clown heads and different things on top of the figures in the etchings. Um, and they turned out really, really great. You can kind of see in this one, you see kind of ears sticking out, and that's part of their drawing of gouache onto the etchings. And they put out a beautiful book of these drawings they did on top of the etchings, and I got a hold of that book, and I started printing on top of their stuff. I was doing silkscreen on top of their, let's see, their etchings, or their drawings on top of the etchings. And I made the whole kind of narrative more into the KKK gone cross-country skiing. So I took all the figures and I put hoods on them, and I put them in a cross-country skiing setting, and that was fun. Let's see. Just quickly, I'm going to go through some of paintings I was doing at the time. These were fairly small and kind of built up over a long period of time. Um, some of these I'd work on for years and then change them and then work on them again. And so they'd build up a lot of paint. Which brings me to another. After that, working with a lot of those paintings, I kind of brought all those paintings back to work on them again. And a lot of the great ones I really liked that were small, I cast them. Um, I took molds of them and then I cast them in resin and pigment. So these are cast paintings, cast objects from those paintings. This is the back of that one. So they really became pretty heavy objects, and I could change the color based on the pigment I was mixing in while casting them. You can kind of see them set together in a box. Um, that led into an exhibition I was in where I made a bunch of the cast gold, and I put together an exhibition called the Golden Cast, which the show was about Andy Warhol and the idea of like 15 minutes of fame and all of that. And so I wanted to address the idea of idolizing artworks or the artists, and what that could be like. These are you can kind of see from the casts, you can see the staples in the side of the canvas. So they really became objects that kind of represented the paintings themselves. This was part of the space, and what I did was I had an image of Warhol when he was in China, and when I was in China, I had someone take my photograph in the same place as Warhol, and I silkscreened myself and Warhol next to each other and made a whole wallpaper um, piece on this giant wall with these cast paintings hung on them. Also part of that piece was I had a suitcase. This was in Berlin, and I was coming from New York at the time, and I had T-shirts made um, where I had that same image of Warhol and myself silkscreened together, and they were in a suitcase, and anyone could take them. So it was kind of spreading this idea of my fame to anyone who wanted to wear these shirts. So there's a bunch of people in Berlin with my face on their shirt. Um, that brings me to another project where a lot of my work started to get more collaborative in a way. This was one of the older paintings that I kind of brought back to life for this next project, where I don't even know if they have this anymore, and it may be more related to Google Images or something like that. But a long time ago, there was an app on your phone, like a smartphone, called Google Goggles, which basically you could take a picture of anything and it would analyze it and then try and bring up from the internet what it thought it could be. So it would kind of bring up any images. If you took a picture of the Eiffel Tower or something, it would analyze it and then show you what it thought it was. So I took a picture of that painting I just showed you, and it analyzed it. And of course it couldn't find it, but it came up with all these images it thought it could be. And it got pretty wild pretty fast. And I guess it was basing it off of composition, off of color, off of contrast. And these were all the images that the painting brought up. And so I started collecting all these images as sort of a database of representations of this painting. Yeah, it got wild. And I guess it would talk, it was looking for the light as well, and different color combinations. And it was fun for me to see what Google thought was in my paintings too. Yeah, so I started collecting all of these. And then at the time, I was, at the time I had gone to China a couple times, and I'm also part Chinese, and that's a part of my heritage that I know the least about. And so I was always fascinated. And someone was telling me about that there's these small different factories that can make paintings for you in China. And so I researched a bunch of them and found this really small one. And I thought it would be a great idea to take all of these images I found of my paintings and have them painted in China again. So these are the images and the paintings I got back from China, which I collected ridiculous amounts of them, but they're wonderful. And a couple things happened in this. I kind of developed a great, wonderful relationship with these painters in China, where we'd almost start collaborating on weird projects together. And this, let's see if I have this here. Yeah, so at some point, I was really interested in authorship and fabrication and who's making the work and what does that mean as an artist, and who makes your work, or how much do you make of it or get fabricated. And so I had asked the people in China who were painting these, and I said, is there any way you can sign the backs of the paintings? And they were like, yeah, sure, of course. What name would you like us to sign? And I was like, okay, sign my name. So on the backs of all these paintings are like different signatures of my name, which I thought was fantastic. Another thing which you can see on this painting, on the back, they at some point as they were painting these paintings and I was getting them back, I noticed that they were a little larger than the size I was asking them to paint them to. And I realized they said, oh, we think it looks really great when you can see the image go around the side of the canvas. And I was like, wow, that's fantastic. And the thing was that that image that would go around the canvas, they would just make up, because the image they had would stop where you could see it, and then they would continue that. And I thought, wow, that's really where the collaboration is happening. That's fantastic. So a lot of these, like they'd finish a building or a window and keep it going. And I was like, you just made this out of our collaboration, and it was really beautiful. You can kind of see here, they would send me pictures of them painting the paintings. And let's see, that moved on to um, kind of morphed into another project or another aspect of that project where like this was the image I would send, this would be the painting I would get back. Um, and then I was very interested in translation and the idea of communicating images into sound or to other forms. And so I took, I brought all these images into a grayscale for printing black and white, pixelated in silkscreen. And so I did that, and I then silkscreened them all onto, you can kind of see onto this wallpaper that's in this space. And this was for an exhibition that was talking about printmaking and collaborative projects. And so I created kind of a sound space. And then I took all these silk-screened images and put them into a program that would translate pixels into sound. And so essentially I could start DJing the images into beats. I created a table here, you can see, and put the paintings inside, and I wanted to do a performance where I would be DJing the images for other people to do whatever they'd like on top of, sound-wise. So there you can kind of see it. It could analyze the image and go through and play it as beats. And you could speed that up or slow it down or have it distort the different beats as it went through it. And so I had a mixer and I would go through all the beats, and I had performers come, different writers, musicians, all sorts of people come, and they would pick an image and say, can you do this to it, speed it up, slow it down? And they would ask me to essentially DJ the images to what they wanted to do on top of it. I can show you really quickly another just variation of those paintings. Um, there was a show in Hudson where I took all the paintings and put them on wheels and on kind of a movable platform display case. And they ended up going in this window, which was part of this gallery. But before that, I took them up to Hudson and I dressed as a salesperson and I tried to sell them to people on the street and essentially explain to them the process of getting these paintings made in China and that they came off of this one painting. And people really loved it. I kind of wheeled them all over the town, and everyone loved the suit and the paintings, I guess. And I told everyone too where they were going to be. It was the gallery was in the middle of the town, so there was information there where people could order them. And they're very cheap because they could order them directly from China. So I kind of, as a salesperson, I kind of took myself out of the equation and they could deal directly with people making them.
Did the painting always have to be based on the original painting for if they were to buy one? Could it be, or could it be a different Google search?
I mean, yeah, yeah, sure. If the people, if whoever wanted to buy it could do their own, of
Mhm.
course. I mean, in this case, it was all based off of just this one painting. But yeah, I would explain to them the process and how they could have anything made in China or their own Google search.
And is that something you're still willing to do? Like if somebody came along and was like, "Yeah, I want to get one of those paintings. I want to do, take the painting and use the Google goggles and do it again." Would that still be something you're interested in, or is that something like you want to like keep?
No, I would, yeah. I enjoy kind of being the invisible middle person
Mm.
that through the process kind of excuses themselves and then it goes on between the those making it and those wanting it.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think, I mean, a lot of this is, I've always been fascinated with the idea of not having like the great idea that I want to hold on to and own, but more just spreading that idea and anyone can take ownership of it and take it wherever they'd like. Um, this brings me just to this other um, show that I had, which kind of relates to a lot of this and gets into the idea of fabrication and art and what it means and how precious or not it is. So I had a show a little while back where I took all the pieces I had ever made. Um, it was about 400 to 500 pieces of work, from prints to smaller sculptures to drawings, paintings, everything. And in the gallery space, I they had a basement space and an upper kind of bigger exhibition space. So I put all the works in their basement and I made these carts for them and I hung things on the wall and stacked them against the wall. And I would let anyone come into the space and they could flip through them, handle them, move them around, put them on the wall, do anything they'd like with them. Um, and this is from an opening. And so it was about a five week or so show, and the upstairs gallery exhibition space remained from the start empty. There was nothing there, but each week there was a different theme, and each theme would then bring works from downstairs upstairs to be shown. I think people really enjoyed just handling the work, which I kind of loved. In a way, I felt it was kind of the part of the process of the work, like it had a history. This is kind of a breakdown of some of the weeks that were there, which I can kind of walk you through some of that. At the beginning, I can show you. So upstairs was all blank except for a platform where I had a chair, two chairs, and a table and some install gear. And I convinced the gallery to let me be every aspect of the gallery. So I was the dealer, the curator, the art handler, the artist, and the critic. And so they let me take over all those roles. So if anyone came in and was interested in the work, they'd say, "We're not the dealers, go talk to the dealer." And so I created this platform to represent that. So in different scenarios where I would be different characters, I would put on a suit jacket, maybe if I was the curator or something. On the hooks, I also had a hoodie if I was the art handler, and white gloves. I had install gear, so when I had to install something, I would use that. And all in all the books on the table were all the works from downstairs. And of course, if I liked the people who were interested in the work, I'd sell it to them for cheap. If I didn't like them, I'd raise the price really high. So it was a little game in a way. This was me in the different roles. I basically just put on a hat or a different thing or white gloves um, as the different characters. And let's see, maybe I'll come back to that. the first, this is the second week of the show, but the first show was essentially a buyer's week. And so anyone who bought anything from downstairs, they could tell me where to hang it upstairs. So then the first part of the exhibition part of the show was based on whoever bought something and they told me where to hang it. The next part of the show was a game based on a game that I made called L'Artisan, which I don't know if anyone knows the board game Carcassonne, but it's based off of that game. And I remade the whole game. I created a box for it and all the tiles. It's kind of a tile-based game where you build cities and roads and different things, except I changed it all to be about the art world, where you're playing as an artist and you're trying to get your work into different galleries, museums, and all of that. And it gets really dark and twisted and depressing really fast. But if you do well, you win and you're the best artist. These are some of the pieces I made out of clay, and I printed and drew all the tiles to go together. Then part of the highlight kind of opening of that week, I had invited all these different people from different parts of the art world to come in and play the game. And it was also projected on the wall so you could see the gameplay in action. And this, again, like the first week, the people playing the game picked artworks from downstairs, and basically as they progressed in the game, when they did well, their pieces represented artworks they picked from downstairs, and they could hang them where they wanted upstairs. So the game dictated how the exhibition would be. Here you can kind of see, this is the end of the game, and everyone had left, but where the pieces are outlined with blue tape is where they wanted them. And so the next day I would go in and install all those pieces properly in their places. The next exhibition part of that show was a week where I gave it over to the people who own the gallery and said, what show would you like to put together based off of my work? And so we talked about it a little, and they said, we'd love to do the thing you did with Richard Prince, or about Richard Prince. And so when I was doing a lot of the Chinese paintings, I don't know if people are familiar with Richard Prince's work. He's a painter who's very tied to appropriation, kind of taking other images from other people and appropriating them and putting them, embedding them into his own work. At the time I was doing a lot of the Chinese painters pieces, he was in a lawsuit with a photographer because he used all these photographs from the photographer Patrick Carew and used them in his paintings. And so the photographer was suing Richard Prince, and there was a big battle going on. And I thought that was really interesting. And so I thought, wouldn't it be cool to take all those paintings that were in this lawsuit and have them made in China? So reproduce them again. So I had all these paintings from Richard Prince remade in China. And Richard Prince didn't like that very much. He was pretty upset, and he tweeted all about it, and it was a whole big scandal. But he couldn't really sue me because he was already being sued for the work that he would have sued me for, and so he just let it go. And plus, the photographer who was suing him saw the show and loved it and thought it was the greatest thing ever. So that was kind of fun. So the gallerists who were there, they said, yeah, let's do a Richard Prince show with your pieces. And I was like, great. And so we came up with the name. His show that appropriated those images was called Canal Zone. And so we called our show Banal Zone. Um, and we tried different things to play with the idea of authorship and copyright. This is an original image of one of his paintings that was a giant painting. And I thought, okay, maybe to play with getting around the idea of copyright or being sued, why don't I break this up into a huge grid and have different people I knew buy each part of it from me. And it would only become the whole painting when they donated it to be shown together. So it's kind of like a Pirate Bay sort of thing where different people are giving the works in order for it to become, but no one owns the whole work. And that's how it was gridded up. And then it was painted again in China. And that's there, it's shown in the gallery. I mean, it was a great Richard Prince show. And the best part was that I was like, why don't you sign it Richard Prince? And so they're all signed by, or as Richard Prince. But different signatures of his name, I guess. And I kind of pushed it to another level. Like this normally is a huge painting, but I've had a lot of his different paintings made in different sizes. So you could get them any size you'd like, really. And the people painting in China actually loved the project so much they started playing around with it, where they had photographs in front of the works, and then they started painting themselves in paintings in front of the paintings, which was really fun. This final part of the show, and I'll go kind of fast because I'd love to get to this another project. But the final part of the show, I wanted to kind of honor the Chinese painters that I was working with. And so I did something where I cleared the gallery and I took kind of 5 or 6 different shots of the empty gallery with just the wall and the floor and everything. And in Photoshop, I blocked out a black square on the wall and essentially sent this image with the black square in it to the painters in China and said, can you paint this entire image except in the black square, paint any painting you'd like, just whatever you'd like. And so they did that. And they'd paint that, and then I would go and hang it in the space of where it was painted from.
It's a wild image.
So yeah, it got kind of meta and trippy.
And so they chose that Richard Prince painting. You didn't tell
Yeah,
them that in
no, they're like, oh, we love Richard Prince now. Let's do this. So they just kept painting Richard Prince a lot. This one, I think I'd send them this image, and they'd paint that painting with the Richard Prince in the image.
So weird. Wow.
And then some weren't Richard Prince's, they were just things they made up, I think.
It's really cool.
That's that. I just, the last kind of project I'd love to show you, just throughout all of this, Grayson kind of mentioned it, was a project called This Red Door that I was a founding member of. And it's now, next year is going to be its 10th year anniversary. And it had to do a lot with addressing the art world and being artists within the art world and what that means. And basically, I applied for a residency a while ago in the Lower East Side in a space called PS 122, which was kind of an old East Village famous theater space for many years. And artists started going in there, and they had studio spaces, and then they started a residency program in their downstairs gallery space. Um, and I applied to that. It was their first year doing it. I applied to that and got it, and then invited two other friends, Chris Stackhouse and Jared Friedman, to join me. And so we went in the space, and we're like, what do we want to do? And we said, I don't know, let's hang out. So we had it for about 2 months, and we just hung out. This was from the outside, the space, and this is a picture from the inside. And so we just brought a table, chairs, books. We brought a little refrigerator, and we just started hanging stuff on the wall. And then it became something where people just started coming. They'd come have their lunch there. They'd come hang out. And then a lot of people started coming, and it became this kind of gathering place. And of course, you get a bunch of creative people in a space a lot. They're like, oh, let's do this, let's do this. So all of a sudden, it took off to become almost like a cultural center where we had events day, night, all the time, screenings, music, dinners, performances, open mics, all sorts of things. And we set up a web page for it called This Red Door. And there was a picture of the red door, which this had. And if we were there, it was a picture of the door open. If we weren't there, it was closed. So we'd be there like in the middle of the night sometimes, and people would just drop in because they'd see that we were there. And it became a wonderful place to hang out, and really brought a lot of people together. And we tried to do everything we didn't like about the art world. So we tried to eliminate any hierarchy of any kind. We said, do whatever, be involved, come up with ideas, invite whoever. Everyone has an equal say to anything. We had younger artists, different artists who were still students, to like Carol Walker, to older artists, and everyone would just come and just hang out. And the only thing was, if you came and did something, we'd ask that you'd leave a work to hang on the wall. So it kind of became this collection of people who were involved. And it was a beautiful time. We built a stage and had open mic rap sessions,
And just real quick, this is Eric Guerrero, who teaches at University of Oregon now.
yeah, that's Eric there, our MC for the night. And that was the first iteration. Since then, we've had about 6 or 7. I'll just go through a few of them. This was one in Berlin, which was in a great space. And I'm not even going to attempt the name of it in German, but it's an old GDR type mobile unit space that they use, where you can kind of see how it's almost like an accordion. It kind of gets smaller. But essentially, they could push it all together. So it's one kind of frame, put it on wheels, move it somewhere, extend it out, and it became a space. And they had permanently installed this somewhere, and it became a gallery, and they invited us to come and do This Red Door there. And we had dinners and events and talks, and we cook outside all the time. And it was always free to the public. Anyone could come. We had friends who also did a mobile kitchen cart, so they'd bring that all the time and cook meals. We did it here twice in Brooklyn as well, at a place, Galapagos Art Center, which I think is not there anymore. But they let us take over, and essentially they'd invite us as if we were an artist doing a show, but they'd say, just do your thing, do whatever you want. So we would do everything. And it was great because you'd have events that were like 5 people listening to someone read some poems to hundreds of people listening to music or seeing a performance, and it would constantly change and evolve. And based on the space, we'd constantly move all the artwork around. Um, so it'd be like an ever evolving visual space as well. And it was a great space because I think people really felt like, oh, I can just do whatever here. It's not connected to anything. If anyone ever sold or anyone wanted to buy something, we'd say just talk to the artist. We don't want any commission or be involved in that. So everything was like directly with the artist. And people would get together and do all sorts of collaborative things they maybe never would have before, because it was just kind of an experimental place. We had one of the last events at Galapagos was a talk with Ken Johnson, who uh, was an art critic or is an art critic for the New York Times. And he said some very racially charged things about a certain show, and there was a lot of protest against him. And so we had about 300 people come to a panel to talk with him about that. And it got really heated and wild, but it was fun. Some of the other types of events, I'll just show you this one really quick. This was in Hamburg, Germany. They had a great space, that they had a huge open door to the outside, and so anyone would come. And the thing we got the most out of this event was that it really activated the neighborhood. Like restaurants and people who lived there would just come and hang out and bring meals, and we'd cook every time, and local restaurants would drop off food. And it became a real community center that they tried to continue when we left. And so that was one of the bigger things that happened out of this, that we wanted to kind of bring something, that a spirit that people could continue as we left. And this is where we did another iteration of a project we had done before, one crazy event called Sister Ray. There's a Velvet Underground song called Sister Ray, and it's a really long song. I love it, but it's long. And Jared, one of the other founding members, and I love that song a lot. And and there's a story behind it where I think the person in the sound booth who was recording it for them hated it so much, and they started playing it, that he just left in the middle of the song. So it just went on and on and on until they kind of stopped and said, that's enough. But anyway, we thought, that's really cool. Why don't we play this song for 24 hours? So we played a Sister Ray song for 24 hours, where we just had different musicians come in and keep playing, just to keep the song going. And that took place here because in the back of this main area, there's a whole bar and a stage. So we had that going on there too. So we'd have meals during the day, dinners at night, performances on the stage. And maybe I'll just show one quick video from that, and that can be it for now, if anyone has any questions. Because I wanted to kind of end on this idea of this red door, because it feels like a wonderful project to look back on and look forward to in the future as something where we're all working together and coming together, because it feels like another time that we're getting together in groups anyways. But this was a video we put together just as a kind of look back, but this was quite a while ago, so it's kind of the early days of this red door. But I can give you an idea. Let me know if you hear the sound okay.
walk down by the Black Creek to see the frog in the godlike beam. To hear the west and listen to the east. There ain't nobody that can sing like me, and nobody that can sing like me. A little early, will you let me be? Way down yonder where the wind blows free. Nobody can see me in a holler tree. And there ain't nobody that can sing like me. Nobody that can sing like me.
Sweet, Grayson.
Way down yonder in the minor key. Way down yonder in the minor key. There ain't nobody that can sing like me. On the blue switch from a cherry tree. And leaning on she and me. Still lots worse than a half a beast. And there ain't nobody that can sing like me. Nobody that can sing like me. Yeah, I have walked a long way. And I still look back to my tangled days. I've played lots of girls since then to stray. Singing ain't nobody that can sing like me. Nobody that can sing like me. Way down yonder in the minor key. Way down yonder in the minor key. There ain't nobody that can sing like me.
That's that.
Thanks, Jomar.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So, so now I think if anyone has any questions, it would be great to hear. I always have questions, but I can probably start off by asking, like, how do you feel about like in terms of like the life in the life of the life of the artist, like what is it like how do you determine what you're going to do in a day, and like how does a lot of the work is social, other work is super like solo, and then some of the work is solo but then has social implications, to sort of bring people in. And I'm just like, wondering, like, during all those times and moving forward, like, how do you figure out what you're going to do next?
Well, I don't know. I would say, I guess very early on, I was a dedicated painter. When I first got into art, I came across painting at the New York Studio School here in New York, and I got obsessed. And I was like, I'm a painter. This is it. I want to eat painting, breathe painting, do painting all the time. And so I read every painting book. I was completely obsessed with just becoming a painter. And I think I kind of exhausted that after a while, where I was like, okay, I want to be completely free to do anything at any time. And so maybe it became more of, I was really interested in the freedom of an artist within itself. And especially, I guess, that not only within the artwork itself, like the object I was making, but the choices I was making in my life as a creative thing as well, where it was like, that was also an art. Which led to a lot of the things of like, even the Chinese painters are kind of playing with the art world system where it was like I wanted to take responsibility for not only the work in itself, but the life after I made it, who it went to, where it went, how it evolved from that. And that was all fascinating to me, like my life and the choices I make in relation to the art I'm making and all of that. Yeah, which then I guess comes into the social aspect. So in a way, I see this red door as an art piece that I'm engaged in constantly with, or something, or as a painting, or as a print in some way. Yeah.
Scott has his hand up.
Hey, Jomar,
Yeah.
just to get, a little bit more context. So how long have you been in New York City now?
Now about 15, 16 years, I guess.
And where were you before that?
Well, I was born in New Jersey, so not far away. And so I kind of grew up coming here a lot. But I went to grad school at Boston University, and then kind of studied at different schools all over the place before that.
And with projects like the Red Door and the sense of community and knowing others and connecting, being in New York 15, 16 years, how long do you feel as though it took for you to arrive there at having a tribe, so to speak, as a foundation, and then to build that sort of collaboration and community?
Yeah, I think a while. I remember coming here after grad school, and although I knew New York from being in New Jersey, I didn't know the art world New York, or what that kind of meant, or I had a dream of what it meant to be an artist. And I came here and got an art handling job and kind of got introduced to it in that way really fast. And it was kind of shocking. I was coming as like this dedicated painter, and then I was like, oh, there's so many people doing a million different things, and anything is possible. And then slowly within that art world of art handling or museums or working with artists and galleries, I kind of got I guess you could say the ugly side too, like the kind of highly commercial side. And we had worked with Gagosian Gallery, like Grayson was saying, our art handling company, and they loved me there. And so they were like, hey, do you want to come work here? And I was like, no, not at all. But they were like, we'll pay you a ton of money. And I was like, all right, I'll try it. And so I went there and I worked closely with them and kind of saw way too much. Saw like awful parts of the art world and the business and the investment. And
Did you work at one or all locations?
the one main one on Madison Avenue.
Do
So
you remember a gallerist who was there for 1 year named Rachel Chaldu?
that name sounds familiar. How long ago was that? Do you know?
Oh, few years ago. She's at Jenkins Johnson now, but she's a graduate of SOU.
Okay. Yeah, I was there a while ago, maybe 10 years or 7 or something.
All right, just wanted the little connection there.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, so that was amazing and horrific all at the same time. I kind of worked closely with Larry Gagosian, so I got to see the horrors of that a lot. But anyway, it was a lot about money, and so it was a big eye opener. And I left after a year because I was like, I can't do this. I want to do my art. And they loved me so much. They called me in. They're like, look, if you stay, we'll pay you. What do you want us to pay you? Anything. I was like, I can't do it. So I left there and got hired by an art advisor, which I didn't want to work for. But again, they were like, we'll pay you anything. And so I did that for a year or two. And anyway, but to come back to that idea of community, that I think through that, I saw a lot of different parts of the art world at the same time as building a community of people, of different artists I knew. And maybe something that brought us together was kind of like, well, how do we want this art world to be if we could have it our own way? I mean, we have a big enough community, we can just do it ourselves. And so it kind of started that way. And like Grayson was saying, we live in a kind of throwback warehouse right now where a lot of people come and hang out. So it's kind of maybe that was kind of an inspiration for this Red Door, getting artists together to talk about what they want to do, and maybe in some ways taking some of the power back from a commercial world into like, why do we want to do this? What do we want out of it? And what do we want that to look like, maybe?
I think this ties into a question from McKenna in the chat. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, I'm not. I noticed that a lot of your work deals with community or is based in your interactions with others. Is this based in how you grew up, the communities you were surrounded by, or the opposite, a lack of close bonds that inspired you to partake in the project you have instigated, or anything else? That's interesting, like thinking about whether or not you were yearning for social connection and surrounding yourself, or if that's what you were used to.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I'm an only child, so maybe yes to that. But I remember growing up where I was always organizing things. I was kind of organizing things for all the kids in the neighborhood. I'd have like a carnival in my backyard and invite everyone to do different jobs and put on performances. And so I think, yeah, maybe a lot of it came from that. At the same time as always being like completely obsessed with playing by myself and doing Legos or doing whatever. And so it was maybe the combination of those two that kind of shaped me as an artist, as far as making specific objects or things, as well as being really excited about communities and bringing people together. Yeah, I'd say something like that. And I was always interested in, I guess, that dialogue between the things that you personally make and you're making in your own private studio, and how that enters the world, and what relationship that has, I guess, to everything else it kind of enters into.
I mean, it makes me think a lot about artists like Rirkrit Tirvanesia's like impact on people, and how we all on one hand sort of relational aesthetics and art from the 90s, we all kind of thought, oh wow, you can make Thai food in a gallery, everyone can come to the gallery and talk, and that's the sculpture. And we all kind of said, wow, that's amazing. On the other hand, everyone kind of went, well, it's also only for people who know that gallery's there. It's this like very elite crowd. And it's not really for everyone. Of course, anyone can come in, but if like a stinky homeless person comes in, then like, what are they going to do? And that's a really complicated thing. I think that this Red Door, the inclusivity that was felt at this Red Door had a totally different tone. And also I think the emphasis on actual art objects, was interesting. And I just wonder, like, with the time at Gagosian Gallery, with the time in all the galleries and all the different commercial spaces, like an artwork is a sort of like an assembly of signs, right? Like a bunch of different signifiers and that make up, the artwork. And I just wonder, like, your thoughts on artworks and the value around art right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, especially now, because it's kind of getting a little crazy with all of that. But I mean, I've talked to you about the thing. I'm working on a project now where I'm trying to always look at that some. And so I am on the verge of committing all my work to never be sold again. It's kind of this weird, kind of strange manifesto I'm trying to develop in a weird way, where I want to just rent artwork and kind of do it for very cheap. And maybe in a way that tries to look at what art is used for, or our relationship to it, I guess, and its value. And I was trying to think about the idea of ownership and how that changes the object a lot. because you can own it, you can sell it. It has a certain type of value based off of a certain system that's been created. And so, yeah, I've been working on a art rental thing where I would love to just rent out art where I would always own it forever. But it could be a subscription thing where people could, rent it for a period of time and something like that. And yeah, I'm trying to do it in a way where I know like a lot of libraries and institutions kind of do that with prints or older works. But I'd love to get a lot of young people, young artists, emerging artists to just do that. And again, to try not to think of it as like, oh, this great idea, let's market this. But I think everyone do that. Why not? Like, I feel like you could, to reach maybe like you were saying, another part of society that can't buy a $10 million painting, but would love to have an original painting in their house and live with that, and could afford to do that. Something like that, maybe.
Yeah, McKenna says it seems like a really good way to remove the exclusivity and elitism of the art of popular creators.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, and I mean, I guess through that process to try and make it as transparent as possible. Like in some ways, I was thinking, oh, as a part of each artwork that you would rent, you could have like its provenance, basically the history of all the people who rented it. So you can see who had it for this time, and it's kind of, more you're bringing them into a collaborative project around this object that no one owns, but is an excuse to kind of do something with it together, maybe, or something.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how that plays out. I think that the way that it starts and the way that people engage and the way that it grows, and I mean the website that you've created so far, which I looked at, is really, really interesting. And there's so many different implications when you think through the way that this might go or the way that this might affect people. I definitely think that, like when people are in school, it's really, really strange to think about what art pool or world you're going into. And, especially when you look at like, just like magazine culture and stuff like that, there's like Art Forum and Art in America and Flash Art or whatever. And these magazines, kind of create this idea that there's this like centralized art world hierarchy that is sort of like a multi-level marketing scheme or something. And I feel like it's really interesting to think about something that's beside that. And I think, personally, I've always thought that there really actually isn't one art world, that whole thing is kind of a lie or a facade or something, but that there's actually lots of different art worlds, and there are a lot of different artists, and their affiliations are more complicated than people think. And also that the art world is built on real relationships between real people who actually care about each other and respect each other and help each other and do things just because. And I think, that should be really good news to people, because it's not actually based on, business cards and professional things. And I think that I'm curious to see, what are your thoughts on that? Sorry, that was a roving question.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, definitely. I think it's a great, I mean, to apply not only the creative parts to the objects and the things or the performances or whatever that we're making, but to the life and the life after that, of the works. And because I feel like we can be extremely creative with all those things, like where it goes, what it does. And yeah, I mean, essentially it's like, the working class artist is kind of like, you make it, so you can decide where it goes, what it does, and how it enters the world. I mean, I think mostly, especially now, is a great, I mean, as horrific as everything that's going on now, there's silver linings possibly that come out of this. And some of them are like, okay, in some ways, maybe all artists are slightly reduced to a similar place right now, where it's like, we're all asking, why are we doing this? And what is it for? And does it mean anything? And if there's no shows, there's no nothing going on. So if you're doing it, you're only doing it because you really want to do it. And maybe that helps us keep asking that important question for when things do move in another direction from here on in, we can be closer to that question of like doing it really just for yourself, no matter what's happening.
Matt says, how long do you anticipate art rentals lasting for? Like how long a person would hold on to it? Would there be an expectation, you know, in terms of the length, and would there be, you know, what are the terms?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I'm still in the middle of figuring all that out, but initially I thought a minimum of a year, maximum of 3 years. So you couldn't just hold on to it forever. You could maybe after a while get it back again to rent for another 3 years, but it would have to exchange hands and keep moving. No one could say essentially as if they're owning it and rent it forever. And so that would help it to kind of keep moving around.
Yeah, we've talked about it, but I've always liked the idea of a patina, an artwork that has a patina on it from being shuffled around for many years, and to know the provenance and like all the people that have like nicked it and touched it and had it on their walls, and to see that kind of patina. It's like anti what we normally think of when we think about, you know, pristine art objects and value, and it kind of starts to upend the value system.
Yeah, and I love to challenge in any way. I mean, how it works in the end, I'm not sure, but how it can challenge the idea of ownership, like where it's really about like try to make it local, even where it's like your local bakery. You don't necessarily need to own the bakery or the bread, but you want to pay to get it, more like a subscription. You want to eat good bread. You want to live with good art. And so would you pay into that rather than having to own it necessarily in a way?
We should probably wrap in a couple minutes, but another good question from McKenna. Is it important to you that there is a meaning behind the things you create, or is it more along the lines of finding a meaning through the process or just enjoying it for the sake of what is at face value? Good question.
Good question. Maybe all those things at different times. I feel like yeah, I feel like different times it starts with an idea where I'm like, oh, I want to do something about this specific thing I'm thinking about, and how can I make it happen? Other times it's more like a doodle where I'm just kind of playing and like, oh, that would be an awesome thing. And so I think, yeah, all of those things at different times. And I think in that way too, I always maybe moving from different mediums or working like on a drawing or something, then switching to working on a big social project helps me to kind of check myself as far as constantly being free and flexible and kind of not getting stuck maybe into like, oh, I do this and that's how it's going to be, and I just keep doing that. Maybe just kind of trying to keep myself honest to not having the control over the art as much as the art. A lot of times I want to kind of tell me where to go, maybe, or something.
But can I dig down a little bit on that? One, like the show where you made all the work you'd ever done, the objects available, like those, when you were making each one of those artworks, you probably felt one way, right? And then when you had them all together and you were talking, you know, using them as material, like how did you know how did that change?
Yeah, I mean, that's, yeah, I guess a lot of it too is kind of trying not to think of maybe your life as an artist and making as so linear, where it's kind of looking back on itself all the time and saying, what did that mean? What did that mean? What did that mean? Or, um, yeah, and maybe trying to have the past things you've done not be past things that lead to something else, but more that are valuable ingredients that help you see what you're seeing now or something. Um, yeah, because certainly, yeah, making all those works, I wasn't thinking, oh, and then one day I'm going to show all of them together and they're just like material. But they become that, and then maybe the next time they become material again, maybe through art rental, they're back again to something else. Or that I think it's constantly fluid and can be circular in that way, and less, yeah, less linear narrative.
Well, this has been great. Are there any other questions before we let Jomar get back to the quarantine life? Well, thank you, Jomar. I really, really appreciate it so much, and I'm so thankful that all of you were here to join, and also thankful that Aram Drabilium is here as well. That's pretty cool. All the famous artists. Yeah. Everyone should look up his work as well. He's a very super cool artist. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
We are going to end, and